Right, my special guest today is Madeline Bocaro, and looking forward to talking to you about your fantastic book about Yoko, um, which has a nice thing for me because the very first thing I ever wrote about the Beatles was about Yoko 25 years ago when she very kindly donated a large sum of money to Dovedale School in John's memory. And I thought, as a Beatles fan, that's not who I was expecting Yoko to be.
Hmm.
And she'd been lovely, generous, been to the school a few times. I met her in Mendips. She was lovely with the children. And so for me, I think she's always had the bad rap.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of what you've been able to do with your book. So tell us the title of your book and what got you started, why write about Yoko?
Okay. So the title is In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. It's kind of long, so here's a visual for you. And I did the book for this main reason you just cited is because she's so charitable and giving and healing and caring. And, I spent a lot of time with her and I wanted to just honor John by telling the world, what he saw in her and getting that
So
out there.
how did you end up spending time with her? How did that come about?
Well, I was actually writing to her when I was much younger, and she started writing back. So that was kind of cool. We were pen pals. And then after John was killed, a friend of mine encouraged me to go with her to the Dakota because she had always gone to see John and Yoko. And she said, come, Yoko kind of needs to meet you. I was like, I never thought of it that way. So we went on Yoko's birthday and there was nobody else around. It was really nice. And within 5 minutes, she came out of the park with her friend and she stood on the sidewalk with us for a while talking. When she saw it was me, she let out this little scream and, oh my God, it's you. And she started, she says, oh, I'm having this exhibition of John's work. You should come to this. I can send you an invitation. And she started sending me invites to all these things. And I went to all her concerts and backstage and everything. So that's how it all gelled. But it really started in like 1968 when I was 10 years old and first saw a picture of her about her Bottoms film. So I was with her all along.
I mean, that must have been fascinating. No, when you're that young and someone's making a film about bottoms. I mean,
Exactly. I just thought an adult is doing something kooky. I love this. Who is this person? And I saved the article. And within a few months, she was with John Lennon. I'm like, this is great. Now I can find out more about her.
now, I think one of the interesting things you pointed out is about their childhoods having some similarities, which I find fascinating. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so they both grew up in really bad times, times of war. England was all bombed out. John really didn't understand why, but and they had these tragic and lonely childhoods, and they each had extreme trauma from parental abandonment. In his case, they, kind of left him, but in her case, they were there, but they were so wealthy and such socialites and so wrapped up in their own world that they didn't really pay her much attention and she didn't have any friends. So, individually they were fragile and lonely and broken, really people. And together they got strong and grounded each other. And they created their own dream world, sort of, and took us along with them with all their positivity and kind of humor and antics, talking about world peace, which is a really serious thing, but they did it with, humor and they really had some good methods there that a lot of people did recognize, but unfortunately, those in power really laughed at them.
But didn't John say, if I have to be a clown for peace, I'll be a
Right,
clown. If people are
right.
going to laugh at us for what we're doing, we
Yeah,
don't care. But if people
yeah,
are paying attention and listening to the message,
right. And he was highly intelligent, which, if he's just a clown, that would have been stupid. But he
yeah.
was this highly intelligent guy, and most people were boring to him. So, you know, together they felt that they had important secrets to share with the world. They were pretty highly evolved, both of them, spiritually in every way. And everything that Yoko said was a surprise to him. She was so wise and so incredible. Like in my book, I show like how she can see things that we don't see, like her half a wind show where she has object sawed in half. We're seeing the half that's there, but she's really showing us the half that's missing. And then listening to music, she would hear the sound of a clock ticking, but she would be hearing the silences in between the beats. So, she just opened up whole new worlds for him.
But I think also, John's had, apart from his wife and serious girlfriend and stuff, but obviously he had many, many women, as all the Beatles did on tour and stuff. But for me, I sort of think he found somebody mentally
Yes.
who could understand him and who he could understand, and maybe that the rest of the world could not understand the two of them, but they
Hmm.
got each other and they connected on a completely different level.
Yeah. And in the song Strawberry Fields Forever, it was right before he met her. And he was singing, No one I think is in my tree. And if you look at the original lyric sheet, it says, No one I think is in my wavelength. He was looking for a mind meld. And shortly after, he found her. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
So give us let's go back a little bit and just give some of the background. I know you mentioned about her family life, but as an artist, irrespective of the Beatles before that, tell us some of the things that she was doing and where she was traveling as well with this art.
So she, of course, was born in Japan, and she was just always writing and reading. And she was classically trained at a young age on piano and learned to write notation. But she felt it was inadequate for what she needed to convey. So she started writing musical lyrics onto the musical staff, like play this with the accompaniment of the birds at dawn, because, that's the gist of it, right? But she really didn't know. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to write music, sing music. But her father told her, "Look, there's no women in music. Forget about this." So she turned to philosophy. She was the first philosophy student at the school there,
Yeah.
but she wasn't interested in that either. And she ended up coming to New York with her family, attending Sarah Lawrence College. And even there, her professor, he was a Viennese composer, Andre Singer, and he told her, look, you're really far out. And there's these people in New York who are doing some things that I think you would like. Because you go and find John Cage and Toshi Ichiyanagi and all these people. So she went over there and she melded with them and Toshio, Mayuzumi, and they went on tour in Japan. And this was early 1960s. And then she started her own little venue on Chamber Street. She opened up a loft where all these composers and artists could perform because there were no spaces in the city at the time for them to do this. So she was pioneering, like she was the meltdown curator almost,
Yeah.
and she did her curate meltdown much later. But her and Charlotte Morman and George McCunis, who the founder of Fluxus, they were all, meeting and melding and working together. But then after touring with John Cage and all them, she became really despondent because it was a man's world. And she's like, I'm not part of this, I'm me. So she literally attempted suicide, but she moved back to Japan and she was institutionalized briefly until an entrepreneur from New York came looking for her. He went to Japan to find her, Tony Cox. And he basically told them, look, she's a famous artist. If you keep her here, I'm going to tell the press. So he got her out and he became her promoter pretty much. And that's when she ended up going to England and, doing the things that started with the Destruction and Art Symposium. And then when she met John. But, the Beatles weren't in her cultural realm at all. As a teenager, she was, born in 1933. She was doing her loft concerts. John was still in the Beatles with Pete Best on drums,
Yeah.
So she was in a whole different realm. And the Beatles were once talking about their concerts at Shea Stadium. And she said, oh, what were you doing in a baseball stadium? She had no idea, that they were the biggest band in the world. So it's interesting. And people say, oh, she knew who they were. And all. Yeah, she heard of them peripherally. She remembered the word Ringo because it means apple in Japanese. She saw them in Life magazine, like in 64. But this is all superficially. And when she met John, she didn't know he was a Beatle. And when she went back to her apartment and told her friends, I think I'm been a Beatle. Are they really that important? Like, what are you kidding? So it
Well,
is what it
what's the truth about? I mean, I'm sure there must be many myths that you dispel in the book. Um, One of the common ones is that she went after Paul, couldn't get Paul, and then went after John. What actually happened?
Well, she approached Paul because she was told, go approach this beetle. And what they were doing is collecting musical scores for a book called Musical Notations for John Cage. It was his birthday project. And of course, Paul had heard of John Cage because he was into avant-garde before
Yeah,
John was. But she approaches Paul, and now, had she heard of the Beatles, she would know they didn't write musical scores.
of
They just
course.
wrote lyric sheets. But he didn't want to part with even a lyric sheet, and he said, "Well, go around and see my friend John." But before she could even do that is when he came to the gallery where she was setting up her show because he had heard about her and asked John Dunbar, the owner, to bring him to, and she was
Yeah.
mad that he brought anyone, actually,
Oh,
she didn't want
interesting.
anybody there the night before the opening and touching the stuff and biting the apple. She was mortified that he did that.
So tell
So
us about that because that obviously is such an important moment, isn't it?
yeah,
Of John going to there. That it's just before it opens, as you say, and the interaction that he and Yoko have sort of connects the two of them, doesn't it?
exactly. First thing he sees is the hammer nail painting on the wall. It's blank, and there's nails in a box and a hammer hanging. And, she said he was staring at it like it was the Mona Lisa. And he asked her, "Can I hammer a nail?" And she didn't want it to be spoiled for the opening. So she said, "No, no." And she said, "Well, I'm going to charge people to do this. It's, 5 shillings." And he goes, "All right, I'll give you imaginary 5 shillings and all that." And that's when she knew, oh my God, this guy. Then he goes over and she had the apple on the stand, the deterioration of the apple is the piece. And he goes and takes a bite out of it. And for years she was like, what? But now she sees the humor in it.
So this is such an important meeting. And obviously with John's, his art background, he'd been a lover of art from before he was writing, even his
Yeah.
poetry, and way before he's writing songs.
hmm Yeah,
And
he
he was
said that.
learning at art college, but I don't think he didn't fully engage at the art college because he was being taught art history and the stuff he found boring. It didn't connect
Right.
with him at all.
Right. He said that he didn't really appreciate art until pop art came along, and it was like the equivalent of rock and roll coming and smashing onto the scene. That was it for him, and that's when he got in because he thought it was all pretentious and even Yoko thought, art's not to be made to be hung on a wall and valued monetarily and stared at. Art is an action that you need to do for healing or catharsis. So they just merged on that level too.
So she was doing some of these happenings, wasn't she? Was anybody else doing anything similar to what she was doing?
Um, Not really. I mean, there were like Dadaist groups, and little pockets of things, but she was her own pocket. She
Mm.
didn't really meld with the avant-garde because they thought she had sold out. Once people started paying attention to her film, Bottoms, and you know, she was getting some, press, they were just kind of disowning her and she was kind of like too emotional for them. They were all cool and hip and, screw you attitude. But she was more like, no, I want to help you. I want to help the my viewers to, interact with this stuff and heal because it was really all about trauma for her. She was just working through it all her life.
Right. So the trauma she'd been through
Yeah.
then is reflected in her art.
Mhm.
I get it. That makes a lot of sense.
That's why she made the yes painting, which is the thing that John
Of
really
course.
clinched it with. It's a canvas on the ceiling with a tiny printed word, and he went up with the magnifying glass and saw it was positive. It said yes, and he's like, "This is it."
Yeah. And if it had been no,
Who knows? And in fact, she had drawn blueprints for that, and one of the words was going to be no. One of them was just an exclamation point. One of them was a question mark. And thank God she settled on yes.
And that's it. I think John was always searching for. I think some people think that art should just be something, oh, you sit back and admire, but actually, art quite often is supposed to be provocative. It's supposed to poke a stick at you and say, hang on, sit up and listen and watch.
Yeah, she
And
once said, I don't ask the audience to accommodate. She just wants to just give them something to shake them out of their stupor, really. And Pete Townsend really appreciated that. He called her a rebel. She's the only one that's really shaking things up. And that kind of influenced him in smashing guitars. There's a whole article with him in Musician Magazine, and he's going on about Yoko.
how
Cool.
interesting.
It's in my
Because
book,
John
yeah.
was always a rebel, rebelling against something.
Hmm.
I think maybe he'd seen through art college, everything was so restrictive and you have to follow these rules.
Right.
And she's saying, no, we make our own rules.
Mhm.
He must have loved that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
And in
how,
the book, I have a lot of quotes from people: Phil Spector, Paul
oh, good.
McCartney, Pete
Yeah.
Townsend, just Klaus Vormann, people who worked with her, musicians, everybody. And they all have these brilliant things to say about her. There's nothing, not a bad word. So,
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole point of doing the book, isn't it? It's, this woman who's been painted, such almost like a bad witch who's broken up the Beatles, which obviously that is, I think now time has passed on. People realized there was so much else going on. And I actually said to somebody recently, I think with John and Yoko, maybe if Yoko hadn't been there, John would have left the Beatles earlier
possibly.
because
John
she was,
might not have been alive much longer after the Beatles. I mean, John was in big trouble with
oh,
himself.
yeah, yeah, he was. And of course, he was dealing with all the trauma of his childhood, which obviously we end up with the song of help, which was his cry for help.
Right.
Now, obviously, John is married to Cynthia, and they got married because Cynthia was pregnant. And so you had this sort of courtship going on. I know there's one of the interesting is when John was out with the others in Rishikesh,
Mm.
that Yoko was sending messages to him all the
Yeah.
time.
Yoko had been asked to, after she met John, she was thinking, what, this is intense, but I'm not looking for this. I'm an artist. I have to continue my work. She already was broken up with two husbands, right? And she got asked to do a performance. Um, she was in Paris with all these musicians, and she didn't really think she was going to go back to London. But Ornette Coleman asked her to do something with him and his band, which ended up on her first solo album. It was a live performance, and it was arranged for the Albert Hall. So she went back. And when she got back to her apartment, she saw stacks and stacks of letters from John. And she said, oh boy, this is it. And then she started writing to him, and he was in India at the time.
So obviously then eventually John and Cynthia divorce and John and Yoko get together.
Mhm.
As you said before, it's a meeting of minds, isn't it? And of course, one of the important things was that her book Grapefruit.
Right.
So tell us about that, how important that was.
So her book Grapefruit is a collection of her instructions, which is the basis of her work. It's basically her paintings, right?
Yeah.
And one of them is blood peace. Use your blood to paint. Keep painting until you faint. Keep painting until you die. And that just shows her commitment to this. Just this is my blood. This is me. This is what you should do. Also, be committed. It's just sincere, honest. And, she had a lot of them are playful, things that you can really achieve, things you can't, but just in your imagination. And that's where John got all the ideas for his song Imagine, because it was imagine this, imagine that. And so, that was really something he appreciated. And there's a chapter in my book that's really long. It's almost the length of Grapefruit itself. It's about grapefruit. Yeah,
It's such an important book, as you say. It got John thinking in a way that, as a child, maybe Lewis Carroll was the guy who really got into his head, and
yeah.
he loved Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and that's what he was waiting maybe for a grown up version of somebody to come along and tease his imagination again.
Yeah, and it's not just imagination, it's just we think of our town, our neighborhood, we go to our post office, whatever, but Yoko's thinking of infinite universes. I mean, she's not even here anymore. She's just, her mind is so expanded, and that's what he was looking for.
So to expand a bit on that, because obviously that's within the title of the book about the infinite universe. What's behind that? What's her philosophy?
Well, it's kind of based on, she has an album called Approximately Infinite Universe, and she's always talking about the universe like it's her best friend, Like she understands it and she gets it and it gets her. So, she's all about, nature and the planet and just, seeing things that others don't see in nature, like knowing that water can feel and heal and has, a power that we don't recognize and that it's more valuable than gold. Like,
Hmm.
who thinks about that? We're paying money for gold, but
Yeah,
water's free. It's like, what's going on in this world? So, I don't know. She just has so many, there's millions of quotes from her in this book. Like, that you just have to, people go, "Oh, I'm going to read 10 pages tonight," but they get through like one page and they have to reread and reread because, whoa, I never thought of this way.
yeah. But it's interesting because obviously normally Yoko gets some paragraphs here and there randomly
Yeah,
in books, and that's sort of it. But that misses the point of
it
who
really
she was,
does.
and I think it also misses the point of who she was to John,
Oh,
because
yeah.
for the was it the first time in his life he becomes monogamous,
Right?
which is quite a thing.
For a while.
Yeah, well, yeah, for a while, obviously, yeah. But she has this massive effect on John, but obviously that sort of destabilizes a bit what's going on with the Beatles, particularly that whole idea of the girlfriends' wives don't come into the studio, but
Well,
John
she only
wants.
went because he dragged her there. I mean, he wanted her there. She wasn't. What's she doing? She's reading, she's knitting. Would you be knitting during a Beatles session?
Yeah, exactly.
No. So I don't know. He was just very possessive and he wanted her there, and that was that. But on the other hand, she was really freaked out when he quit the Beatles, and he said, "Okay, now it's just you and me," and he was all proud of it. And she's thinking, "Well, wait a minute, what's he going to be preoccupied with while I do my work?" She didn't know that they were going to just hit the ground running and start Acorn Piece, bed-ins, Warriors Over posters, concerts, movies together.
Yeah,
She didn't know they were going to do that, but it just it just took off.
there's also that connection with him losing his own mother, because sometimes he referred to Yoko as mother
Hmm.
of needing, because he'd had Mimi growing up when he didn't have his mum there, who
Right.
mothered him, and then I think he had this different relationship with Cynthia, who was what was always like typical of a housewife and loving wife,
Hmm.
but it's almost like he needed mothering, someone to take care of him. Does
Yeah,
that sort of reflect in
she probably
the
wouldn't have put him in his place either, like Yoko would.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and he needed somebody like that to almost to tell him what to do.
And I'm sure Cynthia was lovely. He
Mm.
did love Cynthia,
Oh
but
yeah,
you got these people like hanging on to, they left their husbands. Well, what percentage of people do? A lot of people do. It's not right, but it's not. Sometimes it's just meant to be.
yeah, and obviously, as you mentioned just then, that they start all these various projects, and from someone who'd been quite violent in his youth and admittedly violent to women in relationships as well, suddenly there's this new John who's all about peace. And as we were saying just before, almost being mocked for what he was doing, but those bed-ins made the world sit up. And the fact we're still talking about them now, following what people like Martin Luther King were doing of non-violence.
Hmm. They had a
Who's
responsibility. They felt like, we have this platform. She once said to him, "You're singing, I want to hold your hand. You could have millions of people are hearing this. You could say something important." So, they started thinking, politically because some people at the bed-in actually encouraged him. Um, with the War is Over posters, a guy uh, from Canada was writing "War is Over" in French, and he said, "Well, what does that say?" He goes, "The war is ended. The war is over." And John and Nick were like, "Well, this is great." And
Yeah,
then they got Kosh to design the posters, and they put them all. There's a whole chapter on those too. It's one of my favorite chapters, actually. And John always felt that, the Beatles of their age were the last of conscription. They didn't get called up. He thought
yeah,
he was going to have to hide out in Ireland and do all this running around. But, he said we were the generation that was allowed to live.
yeah,
And it's his responsibility to kind of put that forth and make it possible for other youth to not have to be involved in
yeah.
wars.
And of course, I mean, the Beatles were the first sort of pop artists, musicians, whatever you want to call them, who, like when they tour in America, they moved it on very, very quickly from how long's your hair and all that kind of rubbish to being asked about the Vietnam War, and talking about segregation. And so they were becoming politicized anyway. So it's
Yeah,
almost like this gave John another platform to move on and do something.
right.
Do we know whose idea the bedding was?
Yoko's.
It was Yoko's.
Yeah.
I guessed it will be, but it was such a clever idea.
Yeah. They figured we're going to be in the papers anyway. Let's make use of it.
Yeah, and you're on your honeymoon, so why wouldn't you be in bed?
Yeah, they didn't get much done, but
Yeah,
they invited the world in and they really tried to save the world. It was too much, too much for them.
yeah, it is, but they made a start. You mentioned before about the acorns. Again, what a great idea. So who ended up getting them? Who did he send them to?
Oh, all the world leaders. But the first thing they did was plant them at Coventry
Yeah,
Cathedral because that had been bombed.
yeah,
And it was a part of an exhibition. And first, of course, they got a lot of flack because they weren't married. So they didn't want this unmarried couple presenting a piece. But the whole gist of it was one was planted facing east and one was facing west. And not too long after, they got stolen. But funnily enough, like almost a year ago, they've been found. Those original acorns
wow,
there was a cop that was retiring and he was cleaning out his desk drawer and he found the acorns and it all came back to him that he pulled over this couple for speeding, this young couple, and that was in their possession. And he said, "What is this?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know. We just," and they were actually painted over with varnish. So that even if they're planted now, they couldn't grow. But actually, they're in the Liverpool Beatles Museum. Rogue Best has them now. They got a big unveiling a couple of years ago.
yeah.
So
So
cool.
it's amazing that we're still talking about these things, and obviously we've got the Beatles statues down by the river, and of course the
Mhm.
sculptor has put an acorn
And Liverpool John Lennon Airport, like,
with
see,
it. Yeah, that was the first British airport to be named after somebody. But
nice.
it's just not a thing that we still don't do it. I think there's still only two.
Hmm, really?
Yeah, it's just not a thing that we've ever done in Britain. So that was really unique. And I was there for the opening when Yoko
Good.
was there. You know, and again, it was something big and something important. But a lot of the charitable stuff, like I said, that I started writing on 25 years ago, was the money she gave to the school that John had attended. She wasn't doing any of that for publicity.
No, no, she keeps it private.
Yeah,
It's all anonymous that what she donates. And
yeah,
she's even friends of mine who I know, mutual friends of ours, that she's helped out in tremendous ways, and they would never say anything about it.
yeah. So obviously she's had this bad rap for so many years about breaking up the Beatles, but obviously one of the strangest thing post Beatles is when Yoko sets up John with May Pang for that time.
Mhm.
So what happens there? And because that's it's one of those most perplexing parts of
Well,
any love story.
Nixon wins the election and John goes berserk and he cheats on Yoko right in the same apartment, Jerry Rubin's apartment in the next room. And she hears it. And so that was a little not good for her. So she's like, that's it, we need a break.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're not coming home. But does she let him roam around with strange women who are going to take advantage of him and write books about it? Or does she send him with their trusted assistant who, a nice girl, doesn't smoke or drink, really organized, really smart, go with May? And that was it.
Yeah. And of course, he has his lost weekend.
Right.
And obviously, then they come back together. And also, we get to the sadder part of that story that, they have the wonderful news that they have Sean.
Right.
And in a way, John gets a second chance at fatherhood
Hmm.
to get right what he did wrong
Right.
with Julian, and so
The whole
gives,
thing is just the biggest tragedy in every way. So, like, no matter what, any aspect of it, it's just disgusting and pointless that it all
yeah,
happened at all.
yeah. And the fact he got back into the music, and it's just like starting over. And he was so excited, and she was, and of course they'd done the album
Hmm.
together, and he was talking about all the touring and stuff that was going to follow. And as we know, we have that tragedy of December 1980 of John just suddenly is gone. And yet, for all these years afterwards, Yoko's done so much
Oh,
in the
yeah.
charitable foundation in John's memory.
Well, it's been 45 years, and look where he is now. I mean, nobody's forgotten him for sure, and it's mostly due to her work. I mean, he's a Beatle, yes, but all the solo work, she worked on all those box sets with Sean, releasing them one by one at the anniversaries. And look, she was 33 when she met him. She really only had 12 or 13 years with
Yeah,
him. And it's nothing compared to now the 45 without
no,
him. So it's all weird. It's such a crazy perspective, but there's so much in this story between just her life alone and then the two of them. It's just a fascinating story. Her ancestry is incredibly fascinating also. Her great
okay,
grandfather was a banking billionaire and he was more famous. I mean, pictures of him were in all the shops in Japan. He was just the big guy and he was assassinated
wow,
by, yeah, that's a socialist. And when John went to visit Yoko's family, he saw a picture of this guy, Yasuda, and he said, "Oh," he saw his almond-shaped eyes, and he just had this affinity with him. He goes, "This guy was me in a past life." And Yoko said, "Don't say that because he was assassinated." There's
wow,
all these spooky little things. There's a chapter called Premonitions, which I mean, you can tell like 5, 10 years before events happen, Yoko's singing about them, Yoko's talking about them. It's very bizarre and chilling.
yeah. And so there's a lot of sadness in the story. Um, well, it's at heart, which is sometimes it's a love story, which sometimes I think people forget that they were human.
Right.
The Beatles are real people.
But there's a lot of humor as well because
Oh
she's hilarious. John, of course, was over the top, and them together it was just insane. I wished, I wish people would follow them with a tape recorder. Their whole, pretty much did, but even like out of the press, just them in their own lives must have been hilarious.
yeah. Are there any particular myths that you really wanted to nail that we haven't discussed? Is there anything that thought I need to go and put this right?
Well, maybe the one where they say that she chased him down. I mean,
Yeah,
that's kind of crazy. I mean, there were people there. John Dunbar, the Indica Gallery, and they say there was a time where she got in the limo with him, and he's like, "I was there." That didn't even. I mean, there's just, and she even says, that's not a message I want to put forth to girls. Do not stalk a man. Like that's
yeah,
not, that's not the way to do things. So that, and the Beatle thing, and I just think. I let her speak for herself in this book because nobody else could have done this. I've been collecting quotes from her since, the 60s. And I remember everything she said about certain things. So I was able to piece it all together and have her tell the story pretty much. And it's just brilliant. It's just magical. Um, and I also did a chapter about every song and every album, with and without John, because
Wow.
I wanted, to go through all that. And I had plenty of articles where she talked about all those when they came out. And I incorporated all that. And I'm actually expanding that. My next book is going to be, it's called Listen, the Musical Universe of Yoko Ono. And it's about more in-depth. I mean, these are pretty in-depth chapters, but now I'm talking to musicians that worked with her and just a
Wow.
lot of iconic people who, were influenced by her. So it's going to be all about the music. But the biography just came out as an ebook this week. So now
Perfect.
there's no more outrageous shipping costs to deal with all over the world. Just get it on Amazon as an ebook. And yeah, I think that was holding a lot of people back.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem in this modern day. When you want to do a thorough, in-depth look at somebody, it's going to be a big book,
Yeah,
and it's not cheap to send those, is it?
right. It's a
But yeah,
600-page book, so it's, probably like £5 or something. But even that, it's just the medial mail. It's like $40 shipping now.
it's crazy. But there's still plenty of people who still love to hold a physical book. Thankfully,
Yeah,
um,
no, it's like an art book. It's really
oh yeah,
gorgeous the way it's printed and it's just really beautiful. But the best thing about this whole thing is that her colleagues and her family and friends are all praising it. It's like they're calling it the Bible of Yoko, and especially Sean, he's supporting it,
yeah,
and her daughter Kyoko, and Olivia Harrison recommends it on Instagram because she's really spiritual, so they
yeah.
get along. And Paul has it now. Haven't heard from him, but Ringo has it. So it's just getting into the right hands. That you think you know Yoko, but this is deeper and deeper than you'll ever
Yeah,
need to know. Yeah.
yeah, and she's such an important figure, in John's life, not just in Beatle history, but in John's life. She was so important to him, and now she's carrying on all this amazing work in his memory, which she doesn't have to do.
No.
She could have
No, she
stopped that
didn't. She
years ago.
really, she stopped her own artwork for about 10 years in the 90s to really focus on all his stuff. And that, for her to do that is like really incredible. And she looked upon him as an artist as well, a
Yeah,
writer and an artist and a musician, everything. She really respected him.
I think I'm very fortunate with being in Liverpool because Yoko's made so many trips over here. Initially, to do the stuff with Dovedale School, and I met her, say, in Mendip. We took a group of the children from the school. So whenever she was doing an event, she'd invite some of the Dovedale School children. So if they were in at the airport for doing Mendips and stuff, she always invited the children. But then she was always contributing to our biennial arts festival, just doing something for Liverpool. And we had an exhibition called Double Fantasy of a lot of her own private stuff, which I think was only here and possibly in Japan.
Tokyo. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
Remember
it.
that.
And it was supposed to be here for about 6 months, and it was here for about 18 months.
Nice.
It was a phenomenal exhibition.
Yeah.
And we were so fortunate here in Liverpool that it was hosted here in our museum, and we got to go and see it. It was an amazing exhibition. So it's been able to get a different side of Yoko, which is why I wrote that very first piece all those years ago. And thought, hang on, this isn't the Yoko I'm reading about in books as a Beatles
No.
fan.
Lies, absolute lies written about it. One of the interviewers, I had this beautiful quote from a great interview, and I asked the writer, Caroline Coon, she's a famous writer. I said, asked for permission to use it, and I said, why wasn't this interview ever published? And she said, oh, it was for Cosmopolitan, and I turned it in, and they said, oh no, you got to dirty this up. You got to say how she abandoned her daughter and how she turned on John to drugs, and she just wouldn't do it. I'm like, thank you, Caroline. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it doesn't fulfill the
Because
narrative.
abandon her daughter, come on, the opposite is true. She spent loads of time and effort and money to find this girl, and then
Yeah,
they didn't get reunited till she was, in the 90s. But it's beautiful. At least they're together now. So
yeah. I know she spent years and years doing that, didn't she? Um, Again, no, I think you've done an absolute wonderful job.
thank you.
Um,
Now you
I,
can probably read it, right? You get the ebook and get
Absolutely,
it
I
all
can
set.
afford that one now. That's great. No, obviously we have it for sale at the Beatles bookstore. So you can get
Right.
signed
That's
copies
the
from you.
hardcover.
And as you say now, the ebook is there. So show us your book again so everybody can see it.
Okay.
There you go. In your mind.
And that's how thick it is.
That's easy.
Yeah.
That's fine. No, it's been fascinating talking to you, Madeline. It really has.
Same here, David.
Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely book, and people need to know the truth about Yoko.
And it's just a story of the time they grew up with. You know all the characters. It's the turbulent 60s, 70s, the fun and loving, peaceful 60s. And it's a trip through time, really.
Yeah. And a little peek into her creative mind, which is fabulous. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And
Thanks,
best of luck
David.
with the book and the ebook.
Thank you.
And yes, people go and find out the truth. That's the only place you'll find it. So thank you so much for joining us. And I will see you soon. Take care.
Bye.